Star Wars just came back to movie theaters for the first time in 7 years. 7 years. And the internet cannot agree on whether that is a triumph or a disaster. Critics gave it a 62 on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences gave it an 89. That gap right there tells you everything you need to know about where Star Wars stands right now as a franchise. So today we're going to break down what The Mandalorian and Grogu actually is, what it gets right, what it gets wrong, and most importantly, what it means for the future of Star Wars on the big screen. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is where we go deep on the stories that matter in film and television. Not just the surface takes, the actual stuff underneath. And today, the stuff underneath is fascinating. Because The Mandalorian and Grogu is not just a movie. It is a test. A test of whether Lucasfilm can actually rebuild trust with an audience that has been burned more than once. So let us get into it.to understand why this movie matters. You have to remember what happened leading up to it. The Mandalorian launched in 2019, and it was genuinely great television. Season 1 was tight, focused, and introduced the world to a tiny green child that broke the internet. Season 2 built on that. The relationship between Din Djarin and Grogu became one of the most emotionally satisfying bonds in the entire Star Wars universe. Then Season 3 happened. And look, Season 3 is not unwatchable. But it made a critical mistake. It stopped being a show about a man and his kid. It became a show about Mandalore as a planet, Bo-Katan as a political leader, and the Darksaber as a power symbol. All interesting things on paper. But the heart of the show, the actual reason people fell in love with it, got buried. The result was a season that felt unfocused. The conclusions to major story arcs felt rushed. And the emotional payoff between Din and Grogu, the thing everyone actually wanted, barely showed up. That damage mattered. And it compounded. Because the Book of Boba Fett did its own version of the same mistake around the same time. Lucasfilm was fumbling what should have been the most beloved corner of the Star Wars universe. So when they announced a theatrical film, there were real questions. Can they fix what went wrong? Or are we just getting more of the same? The Mandalorian and Grogu is essentially what Season 4 of the show would have been. The plot picks up after Season 3. Din Djarin and Grogu are working for the New Republic, chasing Imperial warlords through the Outer Rim. There's a mission involving Rada the Hutt, played by Jeremy Allen White, and Sigourney Weaver shows up in a role critics have been careful not to spoil. The critics who wrote about this film described it in similar terms across the board. IGN called it something that feels like a truncated season of television. Den of Geek called it a small-screen rerun. Gizmodo pointed out that Favreau seemed to design it so that someone with zero knowledge of the show could walk in cold. And here's where I push back on the criticism a little. Because yes, it has an episodic structure. Yes, it feels like a few TV episodes stitched together. But is that automatically a bad thing? The first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian worked exactly because of that episodic format. Each chapter had its own small adventure that fed into something larger. The movie is doing the same thing, just on a bigger canvas with bigger action and a film score instead of a streaming score. The audience responded to that. An 89% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. That is the highest of any Star Wars film released under Disney. The only Star Wars movies with higher audience scores are the 3 films from the original trilogy. Read that again. Audiences love this movie. Regular people who went to the cinema on Memorial Day weekend with their families and their kids came out happy. Now the box office situation is more complicated, and it is worth spending a minute on it, because a lot of headlines made it sound like the movie bombed. It did not bomb. It opened to around $81 million domestically over the 3-day Memorial Day weekend, and $98 million over 4 days. Globally, it hit $167 million. That is the lowest opening for a Star Wars film under Disney. Yes. The previous low was Solo, which opened to $85 million in 2018. But here is the context those headlines skipped. The budget for this film was around $165 million. Solo reportedly cost close to $300 million before marketing. This movie is lean by comparison. And Star Wars merchandise generates about $1 billion in retail sales every year. 13 million Grogu toys were sold in just the first 2 years of the streaming show. The film does not need to be a billion-dollar box office event to be profitable for Disney. One Disney executive put it this way when talking to a trade publication. The film will eventually land on Disney Plus, drive tens of millions of viewing hours, and pull new subscribers into watching the original 3 seasons. That is the long game Lucasfilm is playing here. The A- cinema score, the 89% audience rating, and the fact that 52% of audiences chose to see it in IMAX or premium large format screens all point to genuine enthusiasm from the people who actually showed up. The story is not that the movie failed. The story is that the Star Wars theatrical brand is still recovering from years of franchise fatigue. And this movie is part of that recovery, not the destination. Here is what the movie gets genuinely right and why it matters for where the franchise goes next. It puts Din and Grogu back at the center, not as a side story, not as a subplot between political maneuvering and lore dumps. They're the movie. Their relationship drives every scene. When there is action, they are in it together. When there is a quiet moment, it belongs to them. That sounds obvious, but after Season 3, it was not guaranteed. Season 3 repeatedly separated them or used Grogu as a background element while the show focused on broader geopolitical storylines. The other thing the movie does, and this is actually the most interesting creative choice in it, is give Grogu a solo section. An extended portion of the film focuses entirely on Grogu navigating something on his own. He makes decisions. He takes action. The audience gets to spend real time with him as a character with agency, not just as the cute mascot that needs protecting. That is a smart creative move because it opens up a future where Grogu is not just Din's companion. He is a protagonist in his own right. A character whose growth can carry stories forward even as Din's own arc has largely been resolved. Think about what that means long-term. The show can continue with a character who has a near-infinite runway for development. Grogu has Force abilities he has barely scratched. He has a history with the Jedi that the show has only lightly touched on. He is decades old in a body that ages slowly. There is a lot of story left in this character. The Mandalorian and Grogu, for all its modest ambitions, demonstrates something that Lucasfilm seems to keep forgetting and then relearning. Star Wars works best when it is personal. The original trilogy worked because it was Luke's story, not the rebellion story, not the political structure of the Empire versus the Republic. Luke's story, a kid from a desert planet who wanted more, found a family, and chose to save it. The best episodes of The Mandalorian worked because it was Din's story, a man who followed a rigid code and found that the thing breaking that code was the right thing to do because it meant protecting someone he loved. The sequel trilogy lost the thread because it became more interested in legacy, mythology, and setting up the next thing than in just telling a human story well. Season 3 of The Mandalorian made the same mistake at a smaller scale. It got so focused on the world building around Mandalore and the Darksaber mythology that it forgot to keep the emotional core visible. This movie remembers, and that is why audiences responded to it, even when critics were cooler on it. The lesson for whatever comes next, whether that is a proper Mandalorian season 4 or more theatrical entries, is simple. Keep it personal. Keep it small enough to be emotional. The galaxy far, far away is most compelling when we are experiencing it through eyes we care about. Where does this leave Star Wars going forward? The franchise is at a genuinely interesting inflection point. The theatrical brand is rebuilding slowly. Ahsoka Season 2 is confirmed for live action on the streaming side. And based on how this movie performed and how audiences responded, Lucasfilm has a real argument for continuing the Mando and Grogu story in future films. Jon Favreau has teased that more is possible. The audience scores suggest people want it. The real question is whether Lucasfilm will trust the formula that works or get distracted by the temptation to make it bigger, louder, and more connected to a larger narrative web. If they keep it personal, keep it focused on this specific father and son dynamic that audiences have loved since 2019, and let Grogu grow into a genuine lead character over time, then the future of this corner of Star Wars looks genuinely bright. And if they fumble it again, well, we will be right here to talk about that too. If you found this video useful, hit subscribe because we cover this kind of deep dive regularly. Drop your take in the comments. Did you see the movie? What did you think? And I will see you in the next one.